They said I was too emotional, too loud, too much. So when they left me off the guest list, I didn't just crash their wedding, I bought the whole venue out from under them. This is the story of how I turned their perfect day into my perfect revenge, of how I shattered the chains they thought I'd never break. They called me a problem, a drama queen, but they're about to learn I'm done playing their roles. Because this time, I'm not waiting for an invitation. I'm rewriting the guest list. And when the doors close, they'll finally see the woman they tried to bury, standing tall in the kingdom they never saw coming. I've never been much for grand entrances, but watching the wedding unfold from the outside was enough to make me wish I could smash down the door and announce my arrival. I wasn't even on the guest list, and yet I knew every inch of that place, every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the chandeliers. It used to be my family's pride and joy, this sprawling estate in the countryside, but like everything else, it was only ever mine in name. My mother would have said I was being dramatic. My father would have told me I was imagining things. And my older sister would have smiled sweetly, agreeing with them just to watch me squirm. But I wasn't imagining the empty feeling in my gut as I watched the cars pull up, the guests in their best clothes gliding across the cobblestones like they owned the place. I knew that feeling all too well. It was the same one I had when I was a kid, half hiding behind the grand staircase while the grown-ups toasted to futures I'd never be part of. I was the youngest, the one who was always too loud or too quiet, too much or not enough. My mother liked to remind me of that every chance she got. "You're always so intense," she'd say, her lips curling like she'd smelled something sour. "You need to learn your place." My place, it turned out, was somewhere off to the side, out of sight but never quite out of mind. I was their scapegoat, the lightning rod for all the family's storms, and if I spoke up, if I dared to suggest that maybe I deserved to be seen, to be heard, well, that was just more proof that I was the problem. So when the wedding invitations went out and mine never arrived, I knew better than to be surprised. I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head, crisp and icy. "It's better this way, dear. You always make things so complicated." Complicated. That's what they called it when I questioned why my sister could do no wrong, and I was always the one picking up the pieces. That's what they said when I asked why they never believed me when I said I was hurting. Complicated. It was easier for them to pretend I was the issue than to admit they'd built a house of cards on top of my silence. I told myself for years that I didn't care, that I was better off without them. But standing there in the shadows, watching the flowers being arranged and the music drifting out into the warm evening air, I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about all the times I'd been left out, all the times I'd been told to swallow my pride and smile pretty. It was about the way my mother's voice would go syrupy sweet right before she slipped the knife in. It was about my father's cold stare that made me feel like I'd never be enough. I could see them in there, my family playing their perfect parts. My sister, of course she was the bride. Of course it was her day. She was always the golden child, the one who made everything look easy. And my parents, beaming at her like she was the sun itself. They'd never have to see the shadows she cast. That was my job, always in the background, always cleaning up the mess. But tonight was different. Tonight I wasn't going to let them keep me in the dark. I could still remember being a kid in that same venue, the way the velvet curtains smelled like old perfume and the floors shone so bright you could see your own reflection in them. I'd twirl in circles until I was dizzy, hoping someone, anyone, would notice. But they never did. My mother would shush me, smoothing my hair back and telling me to stop making a scene. My father would glance up from his drink long enough to give me that look, the one that said I was wasting his time. My sister would roll her eyes like she was embarrassed for me even daring to exist. It was always like that. Every family gathering, every holiday. I was the afterthought, the extra. They told me I was sensitive, like that was a sin. They said I was too much, too loud, too emotional. My mother's favorite phrase was, "You're overreacting." She'd say it so often it became a lullaby, one that lulled me into doubting my own mind. But not anymore. Standing there watching them all celebrate without me, I realized that the hurt I felt was the last thing I was going to let them take from me. It was mine, raw and real, and I was done pretending it didn't matter. I was done letting them decide who I was supposed to be. I'd spent too long playing by their rules, too long letting them define me as the difficult one, the disappointment. But I wasn't going to let them write the ending to my story. Because here's the thing about being left off the guest list, it forces you to find your own way in. And I had no intention of staying outside forever. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard, I felt a quiet rage settle in my chest. Not the kind that makes you reckless, but the kind that makes you sharp, focused. I wasn't going to beg them to see me. I was going to make sure they had no choice. The venue itself seemed to hum with memories, echoes of laughter that never included me, whispers of deals made behind closed doors. I could almost see my grandmother in the corner, her face pinched with disapproval. She'd always said I was too soft, too quick to feel things. She thought that was weakness. My mother learned that lesson well, turning it into her own armor of ice. My father, he just stood there, a silent judge whose verdict was always the same. Not good enough. I used to think if I could just be perfect, they'd let me in. If I could just be quiet, compliant, small. But I was never meant to be small. That was their fear talking, not mine. I stepped closer to the iron gates, gripping the bars until my knuckles turned white. Inside, the music swelled, a perfect waltz for a perfect evening. But it wasn't perfect. Not for me. And that was about to change. I took a deep breath and let the cool night air fill my lungs. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about every time I'd been told to sit down and shut up. Every time I'd been forced to play the role of the family's scapegoat. Every time I'd swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. I wasn't swallowing it anymore. I watched the bride sweep across the dance floor in a dress that probably cost more than I made in a year. I watched my parents beam, playing their parts to perfection. But they didn't see me. They never had. And I realized with a clarity that cut right through me that I didn't need them to. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love, if that's what they called it. What I needed was to take back the power they'd stolen from me piece by piece, year after year. So I made a promise to myself, standing there in the shadows of the life they'd tried to keep me out of. I would turn this pain into power. I would take what they'd thrown away and build something better. Something mine. And when they finally saw me, really saw me, they'd know exactly what they'd lost. Because I wasn't invisible anymore. The wedding announcement didn't come in the form of a phone call or a carefully worded invitation. No, that would have required them to acknowledge me as part of their world. Instead, I found out the same way everyone else did, scrolling through a social media feed that felt like a highlight reel of everything I wasn't supposed to see. My sister's face beamed from the screen, a perfect bride in a perfect dress, framed by the grand hall I used to sneak into as a kid when no one was looking. They didn't even bother to block me. Maybe they thought I wouldn't care, that I wouldn't notice. Or maybe they liked the idea of me watching from a distance, invisible but still tethered to their show. The post was captioned with something syrupy sweet about family forever, and I almost laughed out loud. Family. That word never tasted as bitter as it did in that moment. I was sitting at the tiny kitchen table in my one-bedroom apartment, coffee going cold in my hands, the dull glow of my phone screen reflecting back the life they'd decided I didn't deserve to be part of. My finger hovered over the image, taking in every detail, the white roses, the crystal chandeliers, the laughter that seemed to leap right out of the frame. And there she was, my mother in the background, that smug, brittle smile she always wore like a badge of honor. She taught my sister well, smile pretty, never let them see the cracks. I didn't realize I was shaking until the coffee spilled over the edge of the mug, dark liquid pooling across the table. I set it down, my hands suddenly too steady, too calm. That was the thing about anger. It had a way of turning everything sharp, of focusing the mind even as it set your blood on fire. I called Lila, my oldest friend, the only person who'd ever seen me for who I was, instead of who I was supposed to be. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and curious. "What's wrong?" she asked, like she already knew. "I'm fine," I lied, though we both knew better. I told her about the wedding, about the post, about the way it felt like they'd cut me out of the picture before I even had a chance to take my place in it. "That's so typical of them," she said, her voice low and fierce. "They're always trying to make you feel like you don't belong." I laughed, but it came out more like a snort. Yeah, well, they're good at it. She was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I stared at the photo, at the ghost of my childhood peeking out from the corners of that picture-perfect moment. I don't know yet, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt something shift inside me. Because the truth was, I did know. I was tired of waiting for an invitation that was never going to come. The wedding was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks for them to plan their perfect day, 3 weeks for me to figure out how to remind them I wasn't going to stay in the shadows anymore. I started researching the venue obsessively, every late night hour spent poring over property records and articles about its history. I found old photos of it from decades ago, back when my grandmother was still alive, back when the family name actually meant something. I remembered how she'd stood in those halls like she owned them, a woman who wouldn't take no for an answer. And then I thought about how she'd turned that same iron will against her daughter, my mother, teaching her that women had to be soft, polite, never too loud. And how my mother, in turn, had tried to teach me the same thing. Be sweet, be small, be agreeable. I'd spent years swallowing those words like poison. The more I looked at those pictures, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent trying to shrink myself to fit into the spaces they left for me. I thought about the times my mother had told me I was too emotional to handle anything important, that I couldn't be trusted to take on real responsibility because I'd always been too much. She said it like it was a fact, like it was something written into my bones, but I was done letting her decide what I could or couldn't handle. It was late one night when the idea first took hold, a spark in the dark, dangerous and exhilarating. What if I didn't wait for them to see me? What if I made them see me? The venue was for sale. I'd heard rumors about it for years, that my family had run it into the ground and was desperate to offload it to the right buyer. My mother always said it was too much work, a burden she was happy to let go. And yet there it was, still standing tall in all the photos, stubborn and beautiful. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Buying it wasn't just about the building. It was about taking back a piece of the life they'd tried to write me out of. It was about proving to myself that I was stronger than they'd ever let me believe. Leila was the first person I told. We were sitting in her tiny living room, the glow of the city outside the window, and I could see the disbelief and then the excitement in her eyes as I laid it all out. "You're really gonna do this?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and wonder. "I have to," I said. "I'm tired of waiting for them to let me in. I'm done asking." She reached across the couch and squeezed my hand, her grip strong and grounding. "Then let's figure out how to make it happen." The next few days were a blur of phone calls and paperwork, a crash course in real estate I'd never planned for but was determined to master. Every time I hit a snag, I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head, telling me I was too emotional, too impulsive. And every time I shut her out, focusing instead on the quiet certainty that I was finally doing something for myself. I'd always been told that women in our family were meant to be pretty faces at parties, silent partners in their own lives. My mother never said it outright, but I saw it in the way she hovered at my father's side, in the way she taught my sister to smile even when it hurt. But I wasn't her, and I wasn't my sister. I wasn't going to be polite or small or sweet. I was going to be loud. I was going to take up space. And that was when I found the twist in the story, the thing I never expected. Buried in the paperwork was a name I hadn't heard in years. My uncle, the family's black sheep, the man they never spoke about unless it was in hushed tones and disappointed sighs. Turns out he still owned a share of the venue, a fact my mother had conveniently never mentioned. I tracked him down, my heart in my throat, half expecting him to slam the door in my face. But when I told him what I wanted, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was being foolish. He just looked at me with a glint in his eye that felt like recognition. "You want to buy it," he said, leaning back in his chair like he was testing me. "You're serious?" "I'm dead serious," I said. He smiled, a slow, crooked grin that told me he'd been waiting for someone to stand up to them for a long time. "Good," he said. "Let's make them see what they tried to bury." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about the venue anymore. It was about everything they'd tried to take from me, my voice, my strength, my sense of belonging. I was done letting them decide my place in the story. This time, I was going to write it myself. The smell of lilacs always takes me back to those parties. My mother loved lilacs in the spring, insisted on filling every vase in the house with them until the air itself was sickly sweet. I remember standing at the edge of the ballroom, the scent clinging to my dress, and feeling like I was drowning in it. I was maybe 7 the first time I realized I wasn't meant to be the center of attention. My sister, of course, was the star, the golden child with the easy smile and the laugh that could light up a room. My mother hovered around her like a queen bee, preening and primping and whispering how perfect she was. I'd watch from the wings, tugging at the hem of my dress, trying to make myself smaller. My father would catch my eye sometimes, his gaze cool and assessing, like he was measuring how much of a disappointment I'd turned out to be. Those family gatherings always had the same script. My sister's name on everyone's lips, my opinions brushed aside like lint on a suit jacket. My mother's voice cutting through the noise, always a little too loud when she was talking to me. "Don't speak out of turn," she'd say, her lips never quite matching the softness of her words. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" I used to think there was something wrong with me, that if I could just be quieter or prettier or less, they'd let me in. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. My sister was the sun, and I was the shadow that fell behind her. I remember one summer party in particular, the kind with strings of white lights crisscrossing the courtyard and laughter spilling out into the night. I was 10, wearing a dress my mother picked out for me, pale blue with a sash that dug into my ribs. She said it was age-appropriate, which I guess was code for invisible. My sister was in pink, of course, her hair curled just so. My mother fussed over her like she was a doll, and I stood there clutching my lemonade, trying to make myself disappear. I can still hear my father's voice that night, low and disinterested as he leaned down to me. "You're not making an effort," he said, the words slicing through the warm summer air. "You're too sensitive. People don't like that." People didn't like a lot of things about me, apparently. My laughter was too loud. My questions were too pointed. My presence was too much. My mother would smile at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite figure out, then turn away before I could see the crack in her expression. As I got older, I learned to keep my thoughts to myself. It was easier that way, safer. But even in silence, I couldn't stop feeling like I was always one step out of sync with the rest of them. My sister learned early how to play the part, how to tilt her head just so and let my mother mold her into exactly what she wanted. I tried too, I really did, but there was always something in me that couldn't be bent, couldn't be smoothed down to fit the family's perfect picture. The generational weight of it all settled over me like a heavy blanket. My grandmother had been the same way with my mother. Cold, demanding, never satisfied. I'd catch glimpses of it in the old family photos, the way my grandmother's smile never quite reached her eyes, the stiff way she'd hold my mother's hand. My mother learned early how to twist herself into something pleasing, and she expected the same of us. I used to hide in the hallways of the venue during those parties, tracing the patterns in the wallpaper with my fingers while the music thumped through the floors. The grown-ups would be dancing and laughing, and I'd be there in the shadows, the echo of their voices like a dull roar in my ears. I'd find solace in the corners of the old place, the grand staircase that felt like it belonged to someone else, the dusty window ledges that caught the moonlight just right. It was the only place I felt like I could breathe, even if it was just for a moment. Sometimes I'd catch my mother's eye from across the room. She'd smile, tight, polite, and I'd smile back, playing the game we both knew so well. Her smile never reached her eyes either, but she never let that stop her from performing. And I think that was the worst part, the way she'd taught me that it didn't matter how you felt as long as you looked the part. My sister thrived in that world, learned how to wield her beauty and charm like a weapon. She was everything my mother wanted, poised, polite, perfect. And me? I was the one who asked too many questions, who felt too deeply, who refused to be silent even when silence was safer. Those memories, sharp as broken glass, are what fuel me now. Every time I doubt myself, every time I wonder if I'm being too much or too loud, I think of those nights. The way my father's cold eyes would slide right past me. The way my mother's voice would turn to honey just before she told me to stop being so difficult. The way my sister would smile at me like she pitied me, even as she took up all the light in the room. I think about how I tried to twist myself into something they could love. How I swallowed my own voice so many times I almost forgot what it sounded like. And I think about how, even then, there was always a part of me that refused to disappear completely. That part of me is the reason I'm standing here now, ready to buy the venue they thought I'd never be strong enough to claim. It's the reason I'm done playing by their rules. I see the scars they left in me, the way they taught me to doubt every feeling, every instinct. I see it in the way I second-guess myself, in the way I flinch when someone raises their voice. But I also see the way those scars have hardened into armor, the way they've become proof of everything I've survived. My mother used to say I was too emotional, like it was a weakness, but I know better now. My emotions are my strength. They're the reason I won't let them erase me from my own story. I remember the last thing my father said to me before he stopped talking to me altogether. It was after one of those parties, after I dared to challenge something my sister said, my voice trembling but firm. He looked at me with that same cold detachment and said, "You're impossible." Maybe I am. Maybe that's exactly what I need to be. Because if being impossible means refusing to be silent, if it means fighting for my place even when they'd rather I fade away, then I'll wear that word like a crown. I'm done hiding in the shadows of their grand halls. I'm done letting their voices drown out mine. This is my story now, and I'm going to tell it, loud and clear. The papers were signed in a lawyer's office that smelled like stale coffee and old secrets. My uncle sat across from me, his expression a mix of amusement and something like relief. The pen felt heavy in my hand, the weight of it pressing down on every breath. My signature scrawled across the line felt like a final break from the girl I used to be, the girl who was always too scared to take up space. When it was done, my uncle leaned back in his chair and let out a long, satisfied sigh. "Congratulations," he said, his voice low and a little rough. "You've got more guts than the rest of them put together." I managed a smile, though my hands were shaking. "Let's see if that's enough." He shrugged. "They won't see you coming, and that's exactly what they deserve." I walked out of that office with the keys burning a hole in my pocket and 1,000 voices in my head, all telling me this was a mistake. But there was another voice, louder, clearer, that said this was the only way to finally become who I was meant to be. I didn't tell anyone right away. It felt too raw, too precious to share, but I couldn't keep it from Lila for long. She'd always been my mirror, my anchor when I felt like I was drifting. When I finally told her, we were sitting in her cramped kitchen, the night pressing in around us. "You bought it?" she asked, her eyes wide, her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "I did," I said, and the words tasted like freedom. She set the cup down carefully, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." I nodded, my breath catching in my throat. I don't even know what happens next, but I couldn't just let them have it. Not again. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Then you make it yours, whatever it takes." The next day, I went to the venue for the first time as its owner. It was early morning, the air sharp with the promise of a new season, and the place was silent except for the soft creak of the old wooden doors. I stood in the grand entryway, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors, and for a moment I felt like a kid again, small, unseen, forever on the edge of someone else's story. But this time, it was mine. The chandeliers were dusty, the light catching on the cobwebs like tiny ghosts of the past. I walked through the halls slowly, my fingers brushing against the cracked paint and worn banisters. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter and music from parties long gone, the kind of laughter that never quite reached me. But as I moved through the space, those echoes felt like something I could finally claim. I stopped in the ballroom, the largest room in the house, and just stood there, letting it all sink in. The velvet curtains were faded, the floors scuffed and worn. It was beautiful and broken, just like me. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. My mother's voice telling me to keep my mouth shut, my father's cool indifference, my sister's perfect smile. All the times I'd stood in the corners of these rooms, trying to be invisible because that's what they wanted. But I wasn't invisible now. I owned this place, every inch of it. I walked to the middle of the floor and spun in a slow circle, the way I used to when I was a kid, except this time I wasn't looking for anyone's approval. I was claiming it. Every scuffed floorboard, every flicker of light. Lila came later that day, her laughter echoing in the empty halls. "This place is amazing," she said, her eyes wide as she took it all in. "It's like it's been waiting for you." "It's going to take a lot of work," I said, my voice low. "But I'm not afraid of that." She grinned. "Good, because I know you're going to turn this place into something they never even imagined." We spent hours that day wandering the halls, talking about everything and nothing. She asked me what I was going to do with it, how I wanted it to look, and I realized that for the first time I could actually answer that question. "I want it to feel like home," I said, "not the kind of home I grew up in, the kind I always dreamed of, warm, real, no pretending." She nodded like she understood because she always did. "Then let's make it happen." But even as the excitement built, there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the fear. My family didn't know yet. They didn't know I'd bought the one piece of their empire they thought was safe, and I could almost hear the fallout in my head, the accusations, the anger, the way they'd try to spin it so I was the villain in their story. Late at night, I'd lie awake in my apartment, the keys to the venue on my nightstand, and practice the words I'd say to them. In the dark, I'd whisper them to myself like a prayer. "You never saw me," I'd say. "You never thought I was strong enough, but I am. I've always been, and I'm done pretending otherwise." The first time I said it out loud, my voice cracked, but each time after, swing it grew stronger, steadier, until it felt like a promise carved in stone. I started making plans, sketches of how I'd restore the ballroom, notes on how to bring light back into the dusty corners. I wanted to strip away the false grandeur and make it real, something that belonged to me and no one else. The idea of it, of turning this place into a reflection of who I was intoxicating. But the thrill was always balanced by the fear. My family had built their lives on control, on making sure everyone stayed in their proper place, and I'd just thrown a grenade into the middle of their perfect little world. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. Lila was the one who found out first. She'd been doing some digging. She always liked to know the shape of things before stepping into them. One night she called me, her voice tight with urgency. "They're planning something," she said. "Your family, they're talking about expanding, taking over more venues, starting some big event empire." My heart skipped a beat. "And this place?" "It's the centerpiece," she said. "The whole plan hinges on this venue." I let the words sink in, the truth of it settling into my bones. So that was it. They hadn't just left me out of the wedding, they'd left me out of everything. They'd been planning their future, and I was never supposed to be part of it. But now, whether they liked it or not, I was right at the center. I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of the ballroom, the moonlight streaming in through the high windows. I felt the fear rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down, because if they thought they could keep me out of their plans, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. This wasn't just about the venue anymore. This was about rewriting everything they'd ever told me about who I was and what I could do. I took a deep breath, the air in the old house thick with dust and memories, and made myself a promise. I wouldn't let them shut me out again. I wouldn't let them take this from me, because this time I was the one holding the keys. The first time I stepped into the venue with a toolbox in my hand instead of a dress and heels, I felt something shift. Not just in the air, but in me. The space wasn't pristine anymore. Cobwebs draped the crown molding, the wood floors groaned under my boots, and the chandelier in the foyer hung slightly crooked like it had finally grown tired of pretending. And still, it was beautiful, because this time it belonged to me. I started small, a broom, a bucket of soapy water. Scrubbing years of grime from the walls felt like exorcising ghosts. I tackled the place room by room, blistering my hands and wearing out every pair of jeans I owned. Every speck of dust I wiped away was a piece of their story being erased. Every stroke of paint was a declaration. I am not who you made me to be. I remember standing on a ladder in the dining room, painting over the ornate wallpaper my mother once bragged about. The brush in my hand shook from exhaustion, but I kept going. The new color, warm ivory with soft gold accents, wasn't glamorous or trendy. It was honest, comforting, a reflection of who I was becoming, not who I'd been forced to pretend to be. Each morning, I arrived before the sun and left long after dark. My body ached constantly, but it was the kind of ache that came with purpose. With every board I replaced, every tile I laid, I felt a little more whole. I wasn't just renovating a building, I was rebuilding myself from the inside out. The ballroom, once the crown jewel of the estate, had fallen into neglect. Its parquet floors were warped, its mirrors clouded with time. I spent 2 full weeks on that room alone, sanding, polishing, replacing. I poured everything into it, not for some grand event or public recognition, but because I needed it to shine again. Like I needed to shine again. I kept the doors locked tight. No one from my family had any idea what I was doing. Not yet. And part of me liked it that way. Let them think I was still licking my wounds somewhere. Let them bask in their illusion. When the time came, the reveal would be mine. Still, I knew I couldn't do it all alone. I needed someone who saw spaces the way I was starting to see myself, as raw potential, not broken waste. Lila introduced me to Jack, a quiet architect with messy curls and ink-stained hands. He wore thick-rimmed glasses and looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but there was something about the way he moved through the venue, touching the walls gently, studying the light, that told me he understood. "So," he said during our first walkthrough, "what do you want this place to be?" I hesitated. No one had ever asked me that before. Not about a space, not about anything. "I want it to feel like freedom," I said, voice low. "Like you can breathe here, like you belong." He nodded, scribbling something in his notebook. "That's a good start. But who are you doing this for?" The question hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened. For weeks I'd been telling myself this was about making a point, about proving them wrong. But when Jack looked at me, waiting, I knew the answer. "For me," I said quietly. "I'm doing this for me." He gave a small smile. "Then let's build it right." Jack became more than just my architect. He was a steady presence in the chaos, offering advice, sketching out new designs, pushing me to think bigger. He never treated me like I didn't belong. He never questioned whether I could handle it. He just showed up and got to work. And in his presence, something inside me started to settle. With Jack and Lila beside me, the venue slowly transformed. We tore down the old stage in the conservatory and turned it into a cozy reading lounge. We replaced the cold marble entry with reclaimed oak floors that smelled of pine and promise. I found a local artist to paint murals on the second floor walls, vibrant, messy pieces that felt like exhaled breath. The entire place began to pulse with life again. Not the curated, sterile kind my mother always demanded, but real, textured, breathing life. We left some of the original imperfections intact, the cracked stone in the back garden, the chipped molding in the east wing, as reminders that beauty doesn't require perfection. Still, a part of me remained on edge. My family didn't know, and that made every decision feel like a gamble. I had dreams where they showed up unannounced, storming through the front doors with entitlement in their eyes and disdain in their voices. My mother's voice echoing through the halls, cold and clipped. "What have you done to my venue?" But in the waking hours, I held tight to something stronger than fear, my purpose. I wasn't restoring the place for them. I wasn't trying to bring back their legacy. I was creating something new, something sacred, a space for truth, for belonging, for anyone who'd ever been pushed to the margins and told they didn't fit. I started writing little notes to myself, taping them to the backs of doors, the underside of chairs, the inside of drawers. "You belong here. This is yours now. Keep going." Each renovation was a reclamation. Every hour spent painting, hammering, lifting, sanding. It all became a refusal to be erased. I was rewriting the narrative one beam, one brick, one breath at a time. One afternoon, after a long day of installing light fixtures and arguing with a stubborn plumber, Jack found me sitting in the ballroom, legs stretched out across the floor, sweat plastered to my neck. He lowered himself beside me, pulling a bottle of water from his satchel. "You've changed this place," he said. I took a long sip and wiped my mouth. "It changed me first." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that feels like understanding. And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't building something just to prove a point. Maybe I was building it because I was finally ready to live in the kind of world I deserved. I didn't sleep the night before the wedding. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the keys to the venue clutched in my hand like a talisman. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they'd see what I'd become while they were too busy playing at perfection. At dawn, I sent out the message, short and cryptic. "The venue has changed hands." 5 words that would throw their entire plan into chaos. I almost laughed thinking about it, how something so simple could shatter the carefully curated world they'd built for themselves. By midday, the wedding planners were in meltdown. My phone lit up with call after call, numbers I recognized, numbers I didn't. I let them go to voicemail, let them wonder, let them sweat. The family group chat, which I was still technically a part of, though mostly ignored, exploded. My mother's messages were a carefully controlled panic, the digital equivalent of her tight-lipped smile and icy stare. My sister's texts were more frantic, exclamation marks punctuating every line. I could almost hear her voice, high, sweet, with that practiced quiver she'd always used to get her way. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The power of silence I was learning could be even sharper than any words. By the afternoon, my phone finally rang with the one call I'd been expecting, my mother. I let it go twice before finally picking up, bracing myself for the performance I knew she'd deliver. "Darling," she began, her tone sugary, the kind she saved for when she wanted something. "I heard, I heard some rumors. Surely they're not true." "They're true," I said simply, my voice as steady as I could make it. There was a pause, just long enough for her to recalibrate. "You're saying you own the venue?" The disbelief in her voice was almost funny. Almost. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. I could hear the slight tremor in her breath, the crack in her perfect composure. "Why didn't you come to us first?" she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We could have helped you, guided you. This is a big responsibility, and you've always been impulsive." I almost smiled. "I didn't need your help," I said. "I don't want it." There was silence on the line, a brittle pause. I imagined her in the kitchen of our childhood home, fingers tapping the counter like she always did when she was trying to stay calm. "You're making this very difficult for the family," she finally said, the mask slipping just enough for her real feelings to show. "I'm done making it easy for you," I said, and then I hung up. I turned off my phone after that. Let them stew. Let them figure out how to rearrange their perfect little plans now that I was no longer a footnote in them. I drove to the venue, the late afternoon sun painting the world in warm gold. The driveway was lined with cars, planners, florists, family friends, all of them caught in the middle of a storm they hadn't seen coming. They gave me curious, wary glances as I stepped out of my car, but no one dared to stop me. Not anymore. I walked through the halls like I owned them, because I did. My boots echoing off the marble floors, the scent of fresh paint mixing with the faint perfume of the roses my sister had ordered in bulk. The portraits of my family still hung in the entryway, each frame an accusation, a reminder of the roles they'd assigned me. I took them down one by one, stacking them neatly against the wall. My mother's tight smile, my father's cold eyes, my sister's perfect composure, stripped from the walls like I was stripping away the story they'd forced on me. With each frame I set aside, I felt a little lighter, a little more mine. In the ballroom, the planners were huddled in a corner, whispering furiously. My sister was there too, her expression pinched and frantic as she tried to regain control of the narrative. She saw me and broke away from the group, her heels clicking across the polished floor. "Please," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "You don't have to do this. Think about how it looks, how it'll affect the family." I looked at her, really looked at her, the sister I'd spent my whole life chasing, whose approval I'd once thought I needed like air. "I'm not thinking about the family anymore," I said quietly. "I'm thinking about me." She reached for my hand, that perfect pleading look in her eyes. "We can fix this. We're sisters." I pulled away. "Sisters don't erase each other," I said, "and I'm done being erased." She didn't have a reply for that. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't quite believe I'd said it, like she couldn't believe I'd stopped playing the role she'd always counted on. I left her standing there and moved on. There was still so much to do, locks to change, keys to collect. I walked through the halls with a sense of quiet triumph, each turn of the screwdriver a final decisive statement. This was mine, every inch of it, not because they gave it to me, but because I took it. That night, as I sat on the wide steps of the ballroom stage, I felt something I'd never felt before. Not fear, not doubt, but power, pure and simple, the kind of power that comes from knowing you don't need anyone's permission to exist. I ran my hand over the banister, feeling the smooth wood beneath my palm, and let myself breathe. This was my moment, my reclamation, but of course they couldn't let it go. My mother, ever the puppet master, tried to sabotage everything in the only way she knew how, by twisting the truth. She started spreading rumors to the guests, saying the wedding had been canceled, that I'd locked them out of the venue out of spite. She thought she could turn them all against me, make me the villain in a story she'd been writing for years. What she didn't count on was how quickly the mask she wore would crack. The lies started to unravel almost immediately. Guests began to call, confused, angry. Old family friends who'd once nodded along to her stories began to see the gaps, the contradictions. They started to see her the way I always had. By the time the sun set, the whispers had turned into full-blown arguments. My father yelling at my mother in the courtyard, my sister crying in the dressing room, her perfect day in ruins, and me. I watched it all unfold from the second-floor landing, calm and resolute. For once, I wasn't the one being blamed. For once, their chaos wasn't my burden to carry, and it felt liberating. I walked through the halls one last time before locking the doors for the night. The place smelled like fresh wood and possibility, like a new story waiting to be written. My story. Tomorrow the wedding would still happen. Somewhere else, maybe, or maybe not at all. But it wouldn't happen here. Not in the place they'd once thought was theirs alone. As I turned the key in the lock, I felt a quiet pride settle in my chest. They'd tried to keep me out of their world, but I'd found my own, and this time, I wasn't leaving. The day after the reveal, the silence didn't last long. My phone started buzzing before sunrise. Calls, texts, voicemails stacking up like a fortress of noise. Each one another attempt to break through the calm I'd built around myself. I let them pile up, the endless notifications a distant murmur in the background. My mother's number appeared over and over, like she was testing the strength of my resolve. My father's messages were clipped and formal, thinly veiled threats wrapped in the language of concern. And my sister. Her words were dripping with sugar, sweet enough to rot my teeth. "Please," she wrote, "think about what this means for the family. Don't let your pride ruin everything." For years, that would have been enough to pull me back in. That was always their weapon of choice, guilt cloaked in love. But this time, I wasn't swallowing it. I sat alone in the ballroom as the calls kept coming, the empty space around me echoing with memories of their voices. The chandelier overhead was clean now, no longer hiding in shadows and dust. Its crystals caught the morning light and scattered it across the walls like tiny stars, and I let it wash over me. This room had seen so many versions of me, small, scared, desperate to belong. I could almost see those past selves flickering in the corners. The girl who had to tiptoe around her mother's moods. The teenager who learned to bite her tongue and smile even when it hurt. The young woman who thought if she was just a little more perfect, maybe they'd finally let her in. They were gone now, all of them. What was left was me. Solid, present, unafraid. I stood up and walked the length of the ballroom, the wood floors creaking beneath my feet. I could feel the weight of the room, the history pressed into every board and beam, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in it. Jack showed up around noon, his work boots tracking dust across the floor. He didn't ask how I was. He just nodded at me, his quiet strength like a shield at my back. "They're not going to let this go easily," he said as he set down his tool bag. I know, I said. My voice didn't shake this time. You ready to stand your ground? I met his gaze. I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't realize it until now. Leela arrived a little later, a bag of takeout in her arms and determination in her eyes. Eat, she said, pressing a sandwich into my hand. And remember, you're not alone in this. I managed a smile. I know, but I think I need to do this part myself. She didn't argue, just squeezed my shoulder and gave me that look she always did, the one that said she saw all the parts of me, even the ones I'd tried to bury. When the calls didn't stop, I finally answered one. My mother's voice came through the line, honeyed and brittle. I'm worried about you, she said, and I could practically hear her frown. You've always been impulsive. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. My judgment is clearer than it's ever been, I said, my tone calm, almost cold. She sighed like she was disappointed, like I was failing some unspoken test. You're making a mistake. This isn't how family treats each other. I took a breath and let her words wash over me without sinking in. No, I said softly. It's not, but you've never treated me like family either. She didn't reply. I ended the call. I turned off my phone after that. The silence was a relief, a clean break from the constant noise. I sat alone in the ballroom, the echoes of old music and laughter still clinging to the walls, and practiced the words I knew I'd have to say to them eventually. I am not your scapegoat anymore, I said aloud, my voice steady in the empty room. It was the first time I'd ever said it, and the truth of it rang through me like a bell. I said it again, louder this time, until my voice felt like it belonged in the space, until it felt like a shield, like armor. Jack watched me from the doorway, his arms crossed, a small smile on his lips. Feels good to say it, doesn't it? He said. It does, I said, and I meant it. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, their approval. All the times I'd bitten my tongue until it bled, only to be told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But in this moment, I felt none of that. Just a quiet, unshakable certainty. I spent the rest of the afternoon locking the doors, literally, replacing every key, every lock, until I knew without a doubt that this space was mine and mine alone. Each turn of the wrench, each click of the bolt felt like a final statement. You can't come back in. The family still didn't know what to do with me. That was the part I found almost funny, how they'd always thought of themselves as so in control, so untouchable. But now they were scrambling, calling each other, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to bring me back under their thumb. I could see the pattern so clearly now. How they turned on anyone who dared to step out of line. How they used guilt and shame and the pretense of love as weapons. It wasn't just me. It was a cycle, a script they'd all been handed, and I'd spent my whole life playing the part they'd written for me. Not anymore. Jack helped me move the last of the portraits out of the ballroom. We stacked them in the storage room, the air thick with dust and memories. As we worked, he said quietly, "They're going to keep trying, you know. To pull you back in." I wiped sweat from my forehead and looked at him. Let them try. I'm done playing their game. He nodded, his eyes warm and steady. Then let's make this place yours, really yours. That night, I stood alone in the ballroom one last time, the moonlight spilling in through the high windows. The air smelled like fresh paint and possibility, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I took one last walk through the halls, running my fingers along the walls, the banisters, the door frames. The spaces that had once felt like prisons now felt like promises. I paused in the foyer, my hand on the cold brass of the final lock. My voice was quiet, but it was mine, and it was enough. I am not your scapegoat anymore, I whispered, the words sinking into the walls around me. I turned the key, locking the doors on the past, and then I walked away, ready for whatever came next. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and unseasonably warm, the kind of morning that should have felt like promise and possibility. But for me, it was a reckoning. I arrived at the venue before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, the dew still glistening on the grass, my breath turning to mist in the crisp air. I wore black, simple, clean, and utterly mine. The keys to the venue jingled softly in my pocket with every step I took, a quiet reminder of who held the power now. By mid-morning, the first of the cars began to arrive, sleek and expensive, purring up the long driveway like wolves on the hunt. They pulled up one after the other, glossy and entitled, a procession of people who believed this was still their kingdom. I stood in the doorway of the venue, my back straight, hands folded in front of me, and watched them come. My mother was the first out of the car, her dress a flawless cream that matched the pearls at her throat. She moved like she always had, graceful, composed, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She saw me there and hesitated just for a moment before smoothing her expression into something calm and cold. "Darling," she said as she approached, voice dripping with a brittle warmth. "This is a family day. Don't make a scene." I didn't move. "The venue isn't yours to claim anymore," I said, my tone measured and even. "You're not welcome here." She blinked as if I'd spoken a language she didn't understand. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, her hand lifting in a soft, patronizing gesture. "This is your sister's wedding. You've made your point, now step aside." Behind her, my sister emerged from her car, her dress pristine, her hair an artful arrangement of gold and pearls. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, eyes that begged me to step back into line, to play the role they'd always expected of me. "I'm not stepping aside," I said, my voice calm, resolute. "This isn't your day anymore." Around us, the wedding planners looked from me to my mother, their carefully curated smiles faltering as the tension cracked through the perfect facade. Family friends lingered near their cars, murmuring to each other in low voices, caught between loyalty and curiosity. My mother's lips tightened, her fingers clenching around the clutch she held like it was a lifeline. "You're humiliating yourself," she said softly, venom beneath the sugar. "You're making this all about you, as usual." I took a breath, steadying the storm inside me. "No," I said. "I'm making it about the truth. About all the times you told me I was too much, too loud, too wrong. About the years I spent trying to be what you wanted, only to be thrown away the second I didn't fit your picture." Her eyes narrowed, but I saw the flicker of something else there. Fear, maybe, or the first crack in the mask. "You don't understand what it means to be part of this family," she said. "I understand exactly what it means," I said, my voice low and unwavering. "It means burying every piece of yourself to make room for everyone else. It means being small so they can feel big, and I'm done." My sister stepped forward then, tears glittering in her eyes. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "don't do this, don't ruin everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm saving myself." Around us, the whispers grew louder, family friends exchanging glances, the weight of decades of polite lies suddenly too heavy to hold. I felt every one of those stares, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I wasn't performing. I was simply me. My mother let out a breath that was almost a laugh, bitter and small. "You've always been so dramatic," she said. "This isn't strength, it's childish." I smiled then, small and sharp. "Number it's survival." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the cold morning air. "You're wrong," my father said quietly from the back of the crowd. The words were so unexpected that for a moment everything else fell away. He stepped forward slowly, his hands in his pockets, eyes tired but clear. "I always thought she was the strongest of us all," he said, his gaze on me. "I let them tell me otherwise, but she's right. She's been right all along." My mother's face went pale, her lips parting in shock. My sister's tears spilled over, confusion and betrayal mingling on her face. For a moment it felt like the earth itself had shifted beneath our feet. "I'm sorry," my father said, his voice quiet but certain. "I should have said it sooner. I should have told you that I see you." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. My mother's face hardened, the mask slipping back into place. She turned on her heel, her shoulders stiff, and walked away without another word. My sister followed, her tears shimmering like broken glass in the morning sun. I watched them go, my heart pounding but my spine straight. They left in a flurry of silk and satin and forced smiles, the golden child's day crumbling around her like a paper crown. I stood alone in the doorway, the weight of their absence a strange relief. Around me, the air was quiet again, the whispers fading as the cars pulled away one by one. Family friends lingered, unsure, but I turned away from them. Their opinions didn't matter anymore. I stepped back inside, the doors closing behind me with a soft, final click. The grand ballroom stretched out before me, warm light streaming in through the tall windows. It was empty now, no flowers, no music, no polite applause. Just me. I walked across the floor slowly, feeling every inch of the space beneath my feet. The room felt bigger somehow, freer, like it had been waiting all along for me to claim it. At the center of the room, I paused. The morning light caught the chandelier overhead, sending tiny sparks of gold dancing across the walls. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet fill me. For the first time, I wasn't someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's scapegoat. I was simply me. And that was enough. I opened my eyes and took a breath, the air cool and clean in my lungs. This was my kingdom now, my home, my story, and I was ready to live it. In the days that followed the wedding, the fractures in my family spread like cracks in ice. I heard about it all secondhand, whispers from old family friends, half-heard conversations at the coffee shop in town, Lila's cautious updates. My mother was furious, her carefully curated image shattered in front of people who had always believed the story she sold them. My sister tried to patch things together, but every attempt only seemed to deepen the rift. My father, I was told, had grown quieter, his voice edged with something like regret. I didn't go to them. I didn't offer apologies or explanations. I let their anger and confusion swirl around them like a storm I no longer had to weather. I watched from a distance as they turned on each other, blame shifting like sand underfoot. It was a dance I knew too well, one I'd spent years trying to keep in step with, but now I saw it for what it was, empty and cruel. I walked the halls of the venue alone in those first few days, each step echoing with the weight of memory. The grand ballroom was still and silent, the dust finally gone, the air smelling faintly of fresh paint and lemon oil. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating every corner, every crack, every possibility. I paused in the doorway and let it wash over me. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was clean, honest, mine. I thought about everything I'd lost, how I'd spent so long trying to be part of a family that had no room for me. There was grief in that, a hollow ache in my chest for the love I'd wanted but never found. But beneath the grief was something else, something stronger. Relief. A lightness I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by their expectations, their judgments. I wasn't trying to earn my place. I already had it. I wandered from room to room, touching the walls, the smooth banisters, the old wooden doors that now closed with a satisfying finality. The girl who had once hidden in the corners of these halls was gone, replaced by someone who stood tall, unafraid. I could almost see her there in the shadows, the child I used to be, watching with wide eyes and hopeful heart. I smiled at her softly. She was free now, too. Jack came by one afternoon as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with gold and pink. He found me in the conservatory, sitting on the stone ledge beneath the wide, arched windows, the light pooling around me like a blessing. "Hey," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Hey," I said back, my smile small but real. He looked around the space, his eyes tracing the new curtains I'd chosen, the plants I'd coaxed back to life. "You've done something amazing here," he said. I shrugged lightly, my fingers tracing the worn edges of the stone. It was always here. It just needed someone to see it. He nodded, stepping closer. "You know," he said carefully, "I've seen a lot of spaces in my work. Beautiful ones, impressive ones, but I've never seen one that feels so honest." I met his gaze, my breath catching a little at the softness there. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. There was a pause, the air between us charged with something that felt both new and achingly familiar. He smiled, slow and genuine. So, what happens next? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I don't know, I admitted. But for once, I'm okay with that. I'm not building this place for them. I'm building it for me, for anyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. He nodded again, his smile deepening. Then I guess we just see where it goes. I smiled back, feeling the warmth of it settle into my bones. Later that night, Lila came by with a bottle of champagne and two mismatched glasses. She popped the cork in the kitchen, laughter in her eyes as the foam spilled over her fingers. "To you," she said, raising her glass, "to the girl who refused to stay in the shadows." I lifted mine, the bubbles catching the light. "To rewriting the rules," I said. She clinked her glass against mine, her eyes bright. "You did it, you know," she said. "You took something they thought was theirs and made it yours. You rewrote everything." I let the words sink in, the truth of them warm and solid. I had rewritten it all, not just the venue, but the story of who I was allowed to be. And in that rewriting, I'd found something I never thought I'd have: peace. I thought about my family then, about how they'd always measured worth in control and appearance. How they'd taught me that love was something you had to earn, something you could lose with one wrong word, one misstep. But here, in the quiet of the venue I'd claimed for myself, I realized they were wrong. Love wasn't something you fought for. It was something you created, and I was done trying to force it from people who would never give it freely. This place, this sanctuary I'd built, was proof of that. Every beam, every brushstroke, every inch of it was a testament to the idea that belonging isn't given, it's chosen, it's claimed. I walked through the halls one last time that night, the champagne glass still warm in my hand. The light fixtures glowed softly, the shadows gentle and familiar. I paused in the grand ballroom, turning slowly to take it all in. The laughter and music of my family's parties no longer haunted these walls. In their place was something quieter, but far more powerful: my own voice, my own presence. I thought of the word family and realized it didn't have to mean blood or obligation. It could be the people who saw you, who stood by you, who let you be exactly who you were. Lila, Jack, the people who would walk through these doors and find not just a venue but a refuge. I let out a long, slow breath and felt the last remnants of the old hurt slip away. This was mine now, not just the building, but the piece I'd carved out of the wreckage. At the edge of the ballroom, I caught my reflection in the tall windows. I looked different. Older, stronger, but also free. A woman who had taken back her story and written a new ending. I raised my glass to that reflection and whispered, "You belong here." Because I did, because I always had. And for the first time, that was enough. The night of the gathering was clear and warm, the kind of evening that made you believe in new beginnings. I arrived early, the venue bathed in the soft glow of golden lights I'd strung across the eaves. No stiff formality, no cold perfection, just warmth and laughter waiting to be let in. Leela was the first to show up, carrying a tray of pastries she'd spent the whole day making. She walked through the door like she'd always belonged there, her laughter filling the foyer with an easy joy. "It feels different already," she said, her eyes bright as she looked around. "Like it finally has a heartbeat." "It does," I said, my voice steady and soft. "It's ours now." Jack arrived next, a stack of records under his arm and that quiet, steady calm in his eyes. "I thought we could use some music," he said, setting the stack down carefully. "Something real, something alive." Together, we moved through the halls, lighting candles and setting out mismatched glasses, small touches that felt more honest than any of the polished events my family had once hosted here. The air smelled like fresh flowers and warm bread, the kind of scent that made the space feel like a promise instead of a performance. As the sun slipped below the horizon, the first of the guests trickled in. Friends I'd made outside the boundaries of my family's expectations. People who saw me not as a disappointment or an afterthought, but as a whole person. They came with smiles and stories, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to shrink myself to make room for them. I moved through the crowd, greeting each person with a hug or a warm laugh, letting myself be fully seen in the way I'd never been allowed to be. There was no talk of perfect family legacies or obligations that weighed like chains. Just laughter, just light. At some point, I slipped away to the small bar we'd set up, taking a moment to let it all sink in. Jack came over, sliding a glass of wine across the counter to me. "To the woman who took back her story," he said, his voice low and sincere. I clinked my glass to his, feeling the weight of his words settle into my bones. "To all of us," I said, "to building something real." Lila raised her glass from across the room, catching my eye with a grin. "You rewrote the rules," she said, "and you did it on your own terms." I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the wine, a quiet pride that hummed through my veins. "I'm never going to be silent again," I said softly, more to myself than anyone else, and it was a promise I knew I'd keep. As the evening wore on, the laughter grew louder, the music from Jack's records drifting through the halls like a heartbeat. I watched people dance in the ballroom, their joy filling the space with something I'd never seen here before. Genuine belonging, no cold smiles, no false perfection. Just people being exactly who they were. I wandered through the venue, pausing in the doorway to the ballroom. The light from the chandeliers caught the warm tones of the wooden floor, the music twirling in the air like a soft breeze. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle around me. This was what I'd wanted, not just for me, but for anyone who'd ever felt like they had to stand on the edges of their own life. At the edge of the room, Jack caught my eye and offered his hand. "Want to dance?" he asked, his voice gentle. I hesitated for just a moment, feeling the old instinct to say no, to stay small. But then I stepped forward, taking his hand in mine. The music shifted to something soft and sweet, and we moved across the floor slowly, not for show, not for anyone else, just for us. He looked at me with that steady, quiet smile. "You know," he said, his thumb brushing lightly over my hand, "I think this place was always waiting for you, like it knew you were the one who could make it whole." I smiled back, the words catching in my throat. Maybe. Or maybe it was waiting for all of us. We danced for a while longer, the music wrapping around us like a promise. And when the song ended, we didn't let go of each other's hands, not yet. There was something there, a flicker of something that could be more if we let it. But I didn't need to name it. It was enough to know it was possible. Later, after the guests had drifted out and the music had quieted to a gentle hum, I stood in the grand ballroom alone. The candles flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls, but it didn't feel like the heavy darkness of the past. It felt peaceful, like a space that could hold all the pieces of who I was without asking me to choose. I thought of my family then, of the chaos and blame they were still drowning in. And I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a calm, certain understanding that their story wasn't mine to carry anymore. As I traced my fingers over the smooth edge of the doorframe, I caught sight of a small, faded envelope tucked into the corner of an old cabinet we hadn't touched during the renovations. Curious, I pulled it out, the paper soft and worn with age. Inside was a letter, written in a hand I recognized immediately. My grandmother's, the woman whose cold presence had haunted so much of my childhood. But the words on the page were nothing like the brittle woman I remembered. "I wanted to leave too," it read. "I wanted to find a way to be more than what they told me I had to be. But I couldn't. I hope you can." My breath caught in my throat. A bittersweet ache settled over me as I read those words again and again. She hadn't been as unfeeling as I'd always believed. She'd been trapped too. Just like my mother, just like me. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket, a quiet inheritance of strength. She hadn't been able to break free, but I had. And maybe that was enough for both of us. I stepped back into the ballroom, the last of the candles flickering softly. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the space wrap around me like a promise. This was my home now, my sanctuary, and I would open its doors to anyone who needed it, anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. I walked to the center of the dance floor and stood there alone, the music of the night still echoing faintly in my ears. I wasn't lonely, I wasn't small, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And in that moment, I knew I would never be silent again. We met in a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one knew our names or cared about our history. The clink of coffee cups and soft hum of conversation filled the space, a gentle soundtrack to the final act I knew was coming. My mother was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window. She looked smaller somehow in the morning light, her hands folded carefully in her lap, the pearls around her neck catching the sun like tiny points of armor. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked tired, older. But then she lifted her head and met my gaze, and I saw the same cold fire in her eyes I'd grown up fearing. I walked over slowly, my heartbeat steady, and took the seat across from her. Neither of us said anything at first. We just sat there, the distance between us stretching out like a chasm neither of us could cross. Finally, she spoke. "You've made quite the mess," she said, her voice calm, measured, as if we were discussing spilled milk instead of the wreckage of a lifetime. I didn't answer. I let the silence do the talking. She sighed and reached for the cup in front of her, her fingers trembling just slightly. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said softly, "why you're trying to destroy everything we built." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see a monster. I saw a woman bound by her own fears, a woman who had spent her life trying to control everything because she'd never felt in control of herself. "I'm not trying to destroy anything," I said, my voice even and low. "I'm trying to build something that's mine, something real." She flinched at that, the words landing like a slap. "Family is real," she said sharply. "Family is everything." "Family is supposed to be love," I said, "not control, not silence." Her eyes flashed, the old anger flaring up for just a moment. "You think you know what love is? You think you're so much better than all of us?" "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I'm better. I just think I deserve to be seen, to be heard." She looked away then, out the window at the street beyond. A couple walked by, laughing, the man's hand resting lightly on the woman's back. My mother's eyes tracked them for a moment, something almost like envy flickering across her face. "You've always been so emotional," she said finally, her voice softer now, almost sad. "You wear your heart on your sleeve. It's dangerous." "I know," I said, "but I'd rather be open and hurt than closed and safe. I'd rather feel everything than feel nothing at all." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us was filled with all the things we'd never said, all the years of pretending. Then she met my gaze again, her shoulders straightening. "You're still my daughter," she said, her voice trembling. "That hasn't changed." I nodded slowly. "I know, and I love you, but I don't belong to you." The words hung there between us, raw and final. I watched them land in her eyes, watched the way they broke something open that had been held shut for decades. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, to pull me back into the old dance of guilt and obligation. But she didn't. She just looked at me, her eyes shiny with something I didn't dare name. "I thought I was protecting you," she said finally, her voice breaking on the last word. "I thought if I could keep you small, you'd be safe." "I know," I said softly, "but I'm not small anymore." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "I don't know how to let you go," she whispered. "You don't have to," I said. "I'm already gone." For a long moment we just sat there, the truth of it settling into the quiet like dust. I felt the weight of all the years we'd spent circling each other, trying to force something that was never meant to fit. And in that space, I felt something shift, some last thread between us snapping loose. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping softly against the tile. "I hope one day you find a way to let yourself be who you really are," I said. "I hope you find peace." She didn't look up, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of her whole life on them, but I saw her nod just once, a tiny, broken gesture that felt like the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. I turned and walked away, my steps light, each one carrying me further from the girl I'd been and closer to the woman I was becoming. Outside, the sun was low in the sky, painting the world in soft gold and pink. I paused for a moment, the cool air filling my lungs, and looked back at the cafe. My mother sat there still, small and silent, the chasm between us wider than ever. But I didn't feel lost in it anymore. I walked slowly down the street, the keys to the venue in my pocket warm against my palm. I could see it in the distance, the windows catching the last of the sun, glowing like a promise. My new beginning. Jack was waiting there when I arrived, leaning against the doorframe, his smile easy and warm. "How'd it go?" he asked. I shrugged lightly. "It went," I said. I said what I needed to say. He nodded, his eyes steady. "And how do you feel?" I took a deep breath, the air crisp and clean. "Free," I said. "For the first time, I feel free." He pushed off the doorframe and stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. "You look like you're exactly where you're meant to be." "I am," I said. As we stood there, the light of the setting sun spilling over the venue like a benediction, I felt the last pieces of the past slip away. My mother's voice, my father's silence, my sister's perfection. All of it fading into something I could finally leave behind. I took Jack's hand just for a moment and looked at the glowing windows of the venue. My venue, my sanctuary. I was done performing, done being small. I was done trying to earn a place in a family that never saw me. I was finally home. I stood in the grand ballroom as the morning light streamed through the high windows, the golden rays catching the newly polished floors and glinting off the crystal chandeliers. Everything smelled of lemon oil and fresh paint, the scent of a clean slate. The walls that once held only echoes of other people's laughter and secrets now held my voice, my story. And as I stood there, I let the weight of that settle into my bones. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who tiptoed through these halls like a ghost, always afraid of being too much or too little. The girl who hid in corners and learned to make herself small to keep the peace. She was still here, in a way, but she wasn't in charge anymore. Now I was the woman who owned the room, the woman who had taken every whisper of doubt, every sharp word and silent dismissal, and turned it into something solid and shining. This wasn't just a building. It was a monument to the promise I'd made to myself. I will never let anyone make me feel invisible again. As I walked through the halls, I ran my fingers along the smooth wood of the banisters, feeling the strength in every curve. The venue had been transformed, no longer a cold, lifeless monument to a family that had never seen me. Now it was warm and alive. Plants spilled from hanging baskets in the sunlit conservatory. Soft rugs muffled footsteps in the once echoing halls. The ballroom glowed with the gentle light of 1,000 tiny candles. It was mine, every inch of it. Jack and Lila were waiting for me in the foyer, laughter in their eyes and the comfort of true friendship in the curve of their smiles. Lila reached for my hand as I approached. "You did it," she said softly. "You really did it." I smiled back at her, feeling the truth of her words settle over me like a soft blanket. "We did it," I said. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." Jack leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed and that quiet, steady calm in his gaze. "You know," he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "I think this place was always meant to be yours. You just had to see it." I let out a breath, my heart light in a way I hadn't thought possible. "It's more than a venue now," I said. "It's a promise, a refuge, a place where people can belong." He nodded, his eyes warm. "A place that starts with you." I knew he was right. This wasn't just about reclaiming a space. It was about reclaiming my voice, my worth, my right to take up space in the world. And I wasn't just going to stop here. I was going to open the doors wide to anyone who needed to feel what I'd found. That home isn't about blood or old wounds or roles you're forced to play. It's about love and acceptance, chosen and earned. "I want to make this a place for people like us," I said, my voice steady and sure. People who were told they didn't belong, who were made to feel small or unworthy. I want them to know they have a home here. Lila squeezed my hand, her smile fierce and proud. "You're going to change lives," she said. "You already have." I thought about my family then, about the generations of women who'd been taught to shrink themselves, to twist their hearts into shapes that would fit someone else's expectations. My grandmother, who'd been trapped in her own silence. My mother, who'd turned her fear into control. My sister, who'd been too busy playing perfect to see how much of herself she was losing. The cycle stopped here, with me. I walked back to the ballroom, the soft glow of the chandeliers wrapping around me like a benediction. The room was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt full, of promise, of possibility, of the quiet hum of something real and lasting. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling the final threads of the past loosen and fall away. This was my space now, my story, my life, and I knew, finally completely, that I didn't need my family's approval to be whole. I didn't need them to see me to know I existed. I had built something that no one could take away, something that would stand long after their voices had faded. I thought of the letter from my grandmother, the quiet confession of a woman who had wanted to break free but never could. I carried her words in my pocket, a quiet inheritance of strength and hope. She hadn't made it out, but I had. And maybe that was enough for both of us. As I turned in a slow circle in the center of the ballroom, the soft notes of music from the record player in the corner reached my ears. Jack's quiet gift, filling the air with a melody that felt like possibility. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me, my feet moving in slow, deliberate steps across the polished floor. I wasn't dancing for anyone else, just for me. When I opened my eyes, I saw Jack standing in the doorway, his gaze soft and steady. He didn't say anything, but in the way he looked at me, I saw the promise of something more. Something gentle and real, a possibility I hadn't dared to believe in before. But it wasn't the point of my story. It was just something that might grow if I let it. And for the first time, I was open to it, not because I needed it to be whole, but because I was already whole. I walked to the edge of the room, pausing at the tall windows that overlooked the rolling hills beyond. The sun was setting, the sky ablaze with gold and crimson, the last light of the day spilling over the venue like a blessing. I rested my hand on the glass, feeling the cool press of it beneath my palm. "This is mine," I whispered, the words a quiet prayer. "This is me." I turned back to the room, the golden light catching the curve of my smile, a triumphant, quiet smile that said everything I needed it to say. I survived. I built something new, and I was never going to be invisible again. The music swelled softly, the final note in a symphony I'd composed with every choice I'd made, every risk I'd taken. I stood in the center of the ballroom, my reflection caught in the tall mirrors lining the walls, and saw not the girl who used to hide in the shadows, but the woman who had claimed the light, the woman who had finally, completely become her own. Want more stories that shatter expectations and build something bold from the wreckage? Stick around, this journey isn't over yet. Dive deeper, share the thrill, and watch what happens next, because sometimes the best chapters come after the final page.